I have an image that I've opened in Photoshop. I'm going to immediately create a background duplicate layer. So this is a background copy. Once I do that, you'll notice up in this tab that an asterisk appears. That means it's ready to be saved as a separate file if I'd like. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, which is also Shift Command S on a Macintosh. I'm going to go to my Pictures folder. I have a generic folders set up for this. This is again our workflow. I started with a raw image that I brought in through Adobe Bridge. Now I'm going to save this into a PSD folder. I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file format, which is PSD, Photoshop document. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to hit OK. So now you'll notice up here, my image now is formatted as a PSD document, meaning I no longer run the risk of accidentally overwriting my original RAW file that came from my camera, just in case. So they're completely separate now. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn this image black and white. Again, you get to choose between some presets here if you'd like. So if you wanted a higher contrast, or you wanted to play around with something lighter, you can, and you can adjust some of these tones if you feel like it. It's your discretion. Now, you'll notice down here in my layers window that there's an adjustment layer here, and I can toggle this on and off so I can see its color, black and white, color, black and white. Now, I'm going to go ahead, that is our global adjustment layer. I'm going to explain burning and dodging first, and then I'm going to do a selection and do an adjustment layer to that selection. Now, over here in our tools pane, you'll see that there's what looks kind of like a lollipop. It's a stick with a circle on it, and underneath this you'll see there's a little triangle here. That lets me know that there are more tools buried underneath this selection. This one's called a burn tool, and so they'll be kind of like-minded, and you'll notice some of the other tools have that little triangle there as well. Now, I'm going to start by explaining what dodge and burn tools are and explaining them through the icons, because these icons are references to a wet darkroom or using traditional photography techniques. So I'm going to show you, this would be a traditional darkroom setup, a generic one. What you're looking at is a photo enlarger. Right here, there's a light source. You have what would be an area where you could insert a negative, a film negative, into a carrier that slots in here. And then you're seeing a bellow, like a bellow camera would be in a traditional large format camera, with a lens on here. And you're able to focus that lens, you're able to lift this enlarger up and down, but in general we're seeing light being shown through that negative, which is creating a projection onto some light sensitive paper. Now, one of the techniques you could use in here is called dodging and burning. I have another image here that'll show this in a kind of illustrated form. So right here is that tool, which is a stick with a circle. I used to use a paper clip, and I would tape a quarter or a penny to it depending on what I needed. And you can see if you hover this over the image while you're exposing that light sensitive paper, you're restricting light to certain areas of that image. The closer you are to the image, the harder that edge is going to be of whatever you're dodging. The closer you are to the lens, the more soft that edge is. Now this is an example of what would be called dodging. Now in our Photoshop you'll see that they show an icon of what looks like a hand in a circle. That's a kind of generic way of doing the same technique here, but what they're using in this diagram is a piece of paper or cardboard that has a hole cut in it, and it restricts the entire image from being exposed except what is allowed through that hole, and you can determine the diameter of that if you wanted. And again, the closer you get to the image, the harder that dodge, or that dodge area is, or burn area is, sorry. And then the closer you are to the lens, the more soft that is. Now, this is all going to help us make sense of these tools and how we use them, because when I'm in the dodge tool, you have some selections up here of how to use this tool. One is exposure, so this would be how long you wanted to be exposing the dodge tool to this. It's a little bit more sophisticated than this, but you can imagine turning on the light source for a certain amount of time. This is that element, so the intensity of that exposure. Then you also have the ability over here to change the hardness and softness of that dodge tool, so that diameter edge will be either hard or soft. Here it's very soft, here it's very sharp. And then you also get to adjust the size of the tool you're using. So if I go way up here, you can see when I hover over, that tool is getting larger and larger, right? And so I'll zoom in here a little bit so you can see. Now, see that tool is much larger now. Now I'm going to show you in a quick command way you can enlarge and shrink this tool using the open and close brackets on your keyboard. So the open and close brackets will allow you to do this more quickly. Now the reason why that's helpful is because you don't want to be shifting up here and then coming over and determining the size you need. It's nice to see it in real time. So I'm going to go ahead and just do some generic so you can see how this tool works. I'm going to dodge the hair of this child. Now, you also get to attack certain values in this image, like shadows, the darkest areas, the midtones, the middle highlights, or the midtones are the grays often between your shadows and highlights. And then the highlights are your brightest or hottest points. Now I'm going to go ahead and do an extreme so you can see this. I'm going to expose for 100%, and I'm going to do 100% hardness so you can see what happens. And I'm going to do this on my background copy. You can also duplicate this if you want, this layer, and call this dodge, if that helps you. So if I do this, you can see how hard that edge is and the intensity of that dodge. And I only clicked that a few times. I'm going to back out now and do a very soft version of that with intensity as well. And it's working really hard, really fast. Okay, now that was attacking the highlights. I'm going to back out. Actually, I'll show you what the shadows are as well so you get an extreme of both ends of that. So you can see I was pulling out. It's really only attacking the dark areas in that area that I'm dodging. And then if I go to highlights, it'll attack and pull out what would be the highlights in that area. I'm going to back out. I'm going to use the history window here, which is also located here, and then that'll allow me to back out more easily of some of my actions that I've created on this tool. So what I would suggest is backing way down to starting with roughly 10% maybe, and start slow. Start dodging that area a little in the highlights, start dodging with the shadows a little bit, and dodging with some midtones, and just experiment with these tools and see what works. We're trying to find some use for these tools. These are local edits. Again, dodging is going to help brighten an area, and so that might help the viewer, when they're looking at your image, focus on a certain point where you're pulling out certain tones to attract the eye. Now, you might also find that you like certain areas of your photo and where they are, and they exist in terms of tonality, but it's hindering certain areas as well in that image. So you can commit to the bulk of the image, but then come in and use this tool to do some fine editing. Now, burning is the opposite. It's going to darken. So I'm going to hover over this. I'm going to use my bracket tool, my open bracket tool, and I'm going to make this larger. Now I'm going to work right over the dodge layer for now, just for speed, but you again can create a new layer if you want. And I'm going to show you some extremes of this as well. So I'm going to go to 100%, and I'm going to go to 100% hardness, and you can see how aggressive that is. Now if I back out of that hardness and go all the way soft, you can see that's going to darken certain areas, but again, I'm at 100%, so it's doing it in a very aggressive mode. Alright, so now that we've done some burning, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to show you how to select an area in your photograph and create a local adjustment just to that area. And this is going to be in a very basic version. We're going to, as we move on through this course, get more and more sophisticated with selecting and masking. But right now, what we're going to do is just select an area and do a local edit to that alone. Now I'm going to create a duplicate of this layer so I can isolate what I'm doing. I'm going to call this hand. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to select this hand, and I'm going to give an adjustment just to that hand. So I'm going to show you over here this tool. It's 4 down. It's called the Quick Select tool. Even in the demo for it, it has a hand. Now the same thing here. You have some options up top. You get to determine the size of the tool for selecting, the hardness of that tool. The hardness is again going to be the edge of that tool when using it to select. So I'm going to select this hand, and I can have it either be soft along the edges of my selection or hard along those edges. Don't worry about the sample all layers. You can do that if you like, but we're also going to hold off on doing some of these select and mask, these refine edits up here for now. What I want you to notice though is you have the selection tool with a default to the plus, and then there's a minus next to it. When I hover over the selection, I'm going to use my bracket tool again to open up this tool, and I'm going to select that hand. And it's doing what it says. It's quickly selecting. I'm selecting all the parts of this hand that I want. Now I'm going to get a little smaller here to refine that selection there. And you'll notice that it crept up into the corner of this hand of the child. So I'm going to get smaller with my tool by using the close bracket tool. And over here I could either select the minus tool here, or if I use my Alt Option key, I want you to notice how it's flickering back and forth up here. If I hold down the Alt Option key, it allows me to select right there and subtract from that selection. Now I'm going to toggle back to letting go of the Alt Option key, and it'll allow me to reselect some of this. And I'm just going to do a rough edit here. So if I hit again the selection tool or the Alt Option key and I deselect or subtract from that selection right there, you can see how it's refining against that edge. Now I have the hand selected here. It won't always be this easy. Sometimes it will want to select things outside this area, and you're going to want to go in and refine and deselect or subtract from that selection. And back out here, I'm hitting Command minus right now to zoom out. You can also do Command 0 and it'll bring you back to full screen like that. Now I'm on this layer. I have this hand selected right now, and I'm going to add an adjustment to this. Right now I'm going to, for fun, brighten this selection and just give you an idea of how that would work. Now this is a very rough selection, so you can see that that's really showing up, but you can see how that brightens that area. I can also darken that hand and so on and so forth. So maybe if I wanted to calm that area a little bit, maybe up the contrast some, you can see how that is creating that selection just to, or that adjustment just to that selection. Now I want you to notice over in the layers pane here that I had hand, I had this layer selected. I did the selection tool, this quick select tool, which gave me a selected area, and then I did an adjustment layer of brightness contrast, and you can see that it just adjusted to that hand right there. This is what we'll later start calling a mask, a layer mask, and I'll explain how we can manipulate these layer masks later in order to make more refined edits. Now, one of the things I can do right now too is I can right click on this brightness contrast mask and I can re-add my selection here, and I can do another adjustment. As long as I select this layer again, this is selected, I can do another adjustment to that. So for instance, I could add a warming filter just to that area, which isn't really going to do much, but you can see that that can adjust some of the contrast. So if I went to red here, for instance, I can change the density of that and adjust things. And again, that's just another adjustment layer to that same selection that I had on the hand layer here.